Hi, today we're going to take a look at the application part of wisdom literature. Under day 1, I had you read Psalm 27. Of the 7 types of psalms that I had listed, which type do you think Psalm 27 is? I think it's a song of trust. The reason is, in verse 3, it says, "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." Verse 5, "For in the day of trouble he will keep me safe in his dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of his sacred tent and set me high upon a rock." And in verse 13, "I will remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." So that's a psalm of trust. How does the way you handle adversity compare with the trust in God that the psalmist has? Well, for me, by reading this psalm, I realize that when bad times come, not if, that God will see me through them. Day 2, read Psalm 27 again. In verse 1, what kind of parallelism do you see between the 2 sets of lines there? Now, verse 1 says this, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Those really are 2 different ways of saying the same thing. That's a synonymous parallelism where the ideas presented are similar. In verse 1, how do the rhetorical questions contribute to the author's confidence in the Lord? Now, if you remember, a rhetorical question is a question that really doesn't need an answer. It answers itself. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" That's pretty obvious. No one. "The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Again, that really doesn't require an answer because it answers itself. No one. So here we can say the psalmist is not afraid of anybody or anything. In verse 2 and 3, the author uses what figure of speech to describe the opposition he is up against? "When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then I will be confident." I think that's pretty obvious. When we read these, I don't see my enemies as devouring me. I don't see an army besieging me. This is hyperbole, and if you remember, hyperbole is overstatement to make a point. So I think here in verses 2 and 3, the author is using hyperbole to show the opposition he is up against. Do you ever feel this way? Wow, I sure do. I have many times, and I'm sure many times in the future I will feel this way. I need to remember this, that even though war break out against me, even then I'll be confident. In verse 4, what does the psalmist desire? Again, this is pretty easy. "One thing I ask of the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple." It's pretty obvious he just wants to be in God's presence all the time. Now, in saying this, I want to point out something, and that is that doesn't mean you won't be that you won't be afraid. It just means that you won't let fear rule over you. If you take a look in the New Testament, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, it says this, "Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That to me says, you may be afraid, but the fear will not rule you. You'll realize, yeah, this is a fearful situation, but God will see me through this. And that will give you a peace, which is really, a lot of people who aren't Christians, and even some Christians, don't understand this peace. Back when I was working as an engineer at Chrysler, I got laid off. It was 1980. Chrysler was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had to lay a lot of people off. I was one. At the time, I had a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, and my wife was pregnant with our 3rd child. Another engineer that I was good friends with wasn't married, didn't have any kids, didn't have a house payment to make, just lived in an apartment. He was petrified. He was asking me, what am I going to do? There are no engineering jobs in Michigan. The only way I could get an engineering job is to move out of state. And he said, I'm in the middle of grad school right now. I got bills from my schooling to pay for. He said, I'm afraid. I don't know what's going to happen to me in the near future. I told him, I said, I'm not afraid. I said, maybe I should be, but I'm not, because while this was a surprise to me, this wasn't a surprise to God. He knew this was coming. And so I just need to trust him. And my friend could not understand that. He said, how can you be so peaceful when your whole world is coming apart? And I said, because my whole world's not coming apart. Like I say, God knew this was coming. Did that mean tough times were ahead? It sure did. Did it mean we really had to scrimp and save? It sure did. But God saw me through that whole time. That's the peace that can come from trusting in God, and a lot of people won't understand that. Day 3, read Psalm 27 again. You probably noticed that I'm having you read Psalm 27 a lot. In the first week, remember when I said that the Bible repeated things a lot? It repeated things because it wanted to remind us, hey, this is a big deal. Listen up. Well, that's what I'm doing here. What are some things that you learned about God and his character in this psalm? Well, one of the things that I learned from this psalm is there are going to be times of trouble. The Christian life is not a garden of roses. There are going to be times of trouble. And when they come, we need to realize this is not a surprise to God. He knew this was coming, and we need to put our trust in him to see us through. We also need to be willing to say, okay, what lessons do you want me to learn from this? Is this just something stupid that I did and I'm now reaping the consequences, and hopefully I can learn it so I won't make the mistake in the future? Or is this just something that, life happens, and you knew this was going to happen, Lord, and so I'm trusting you to just comfort me and guide me through this. How does this psalm change the way you view God? Well, for me, it was no matter what happens, I'm in God's hands. And because I'm in God's hands, I'm safe. Doesn't mean hard times aren't ahead, but it means that God will get me through those hard times. What needs to change about the way you relate to God and how you are going to do this? Well, I think the big thing in Psalm 27 for me is verse 13 and 14. I remain confident of this: I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord.